Everything pretty much went according to plan in the first round of the CFP with Miami, Oregon, Bama, and Ole Miss moving right along. We will break down all four of the quarterfinal games right here, so stick around for a quick little preview and what you should be betting for each of these football games. Ninja here with Josie Costigan. Welcome to the channel. Hit that thumbs up button, hit that subscribe button. But Josie, let's get into it here. Ohio State versus Miami. Buckeyes, 9.5-point home faves here in the Cotton Bowl. First time in over 2 years. But the Canes have been a dog of at least 7 total, 42.5, the lowest of the quarterfinal matchups. Miami here after the 10-3 win against A&M in a game that clearly exposed A&M as total frauds, but I digress. The Hurricanes defense punished Marcel Reed in round 1 with 7 sacks. Can they repeat that performance against Ohio State in that very good offensive line and get to Julian Sayin here?
Yeah, I think they can try, but matching what they did in round 1 for me is at least, that's a pretty tall order. Those 7 sacks and 9 tackles for loss against Texas A&M and, forcing 2 interceptions and a fumble. But for me, Ohio State's offense is just designed to kind of limit those, chances and really slow down the game. 31.6 seconds per play, the slowest tempo in the nation. So they really give Sayin some breathing room in the pocket there. That said, Ohio State's offensive line did allow 5 sacks in that Big Ten title loss to Indiana. So, maybe Miami's defense could find opportunities there. They may get pressure, a sack or 2, but expecting another 7-sack night against a unit kind of built to protect the quarterback and probably who have tightened up a lot since that Big Ten matchup. Again, I just think that's a tall order.
Ohio State's defense, absolutely nasty. And that game against A&M didn't really do a whole lot for confidence in the Miami offense, maybe moving forward. Can Miami score enough against this Ohio State defense? If they play like they did against A&M, they probably get blown out here, right? But Mark Fletcher absolutely carried the Canes in that game. But what do you expect here this week?
Yeah, I think if they try to win this the same way they beat Texas A&M, that's probably not going to be enough. Just 10 points on 260 yards. That's crazy. The Buckeyes are the best defense in the nation, giving up 8 points, 217 yards per game, ranking number 1 in pass defense and number 5 against the run. So that's really a brutal matchup for Miami offense that kind of prefers to stay efficient and pretty one-dimensional rather than explosive. The biggest thing for me is Miami is really good in the red zone. They convert on 92% of red zone trips, but asking them to hit that number against a team that's barely allowing a touchdown a game is really unrealistic. Carson Beck, let's not forget, he has still thrown 10 interceptions this season. And, I think Ohio State kind of thrives on forcing conservative offenses into mistakes. So I think Miami can move the ball in spots and likely settle for a few field goals. Maybe Fletcher, finds an opening every now and then, but scoring touchdowns against this unit is a massive challenge.
It's 2 prestige programs. It's teams littered with star power. But we got the Buckeyes as 9.5 point faves here. Total 42.5. What's your bet here?
To me, this game is really shaping up to be a take what you can get type of matchup. So I just think, both teams ranking near the top and nationally in time of possession. They operate at pretty deliberately slow pace per play. They rely on their defenses. I think we are having 2 quarterbacks who, have had turnover issues, whether recently or throughout the season, and defenses that kind of know they can get away with applying that pressure. So I would expect a more conservative approach on the sidelines. Add in the recent, betting history with the under hitting in 4 of Ohio State's last 5 and 3 of Miami's last 4. I actually kind of like the under at 42.5 points here.
And that's at -112 as we sit here looking at DraftKings. Talking CFP quarterfinals with Josie Costigan. Let's dig into Texas Tech and Oregon in the Orange Bowl. Ducks 1.5 point faves in this one. Total 52.5 here. This is the longest possible road trip Oregon could get. But they should be reasonably well rested after beating JMU as soon as the game started for all intents and purposes. But the defense, maybe not as dominant as it maybe should have been. JMU put up some points, generated some offense. Should that be a concern for people thinking of backing Oregon here?
Yeah, Oregon might be having whiplash considering last week they were 21.5 point favorites and now they're 1.5 point favorites. They're probably what do people think of us? I think it's fair to bring up. I think it shouldn't scare people off too much. Like you said, the Ducks were up, 33-3 through the second quarter or something like that. So the game was, basically over. I think that also allowed Oregon to probably rest as the game clock was still ticking. But that defense did give up over 500 yards, easily its worst yardage total of the season, which really stands out. But that said, I think context matters. Prior to that game, Oregon was still just allowing 14 points per game and, just around 270 yards. So one sloppy performance for me after a long, a great season isn't enough to erase that whole season of consistency. And there's also a possibility too that the Ducks were looking at that game versus James Madison the same way we were, which is like, this is a joke, right? So, it's not an excuse for a night off, but there is a chance that some of the guys on that field took their foot off the gas a bit.
For sure. And like you said, like the offensive output from JMU jumps off the page because this Oregon defense, the defense is elite. It had been all season and very much like Texas Tech. So on paper, we've got a clash of two elite defenses. But which defense is getting the matchup that maybe plays into their hands a bit more? It's the Texas Tech D against, Dante Moore in this Oregon offense. Dante Moore probably better rolling out of the pocket than standing in as a pocket passer. Maybe the Red Raiders can limit him that way. But against the Oregon defense versus a Texas Tech offense that can't really generate touchdowns in the red zone. So who plays into it more here?
Yeah, this is a weird matchup, but I think it actually kind of leans more for Texas Tech. For me, defensively, I just think what the Red Raiders do best lines up most with what can slow down Oregon. Texas Tech is number 1 nationally against the run, allowing just 70 yards per game. And I think that directly challenges the foundation of Oregon's offense, with Noah Whittington and Jordan Davison. Texas Tech has held, Navy, Utah, Arizona State, BYU, all really strong rushing teams, well below their season averages this year. I think also, too, Oregon did struggle a bit offensively against top 10 defenses this year, scoring 18 against Iowa and 20 against Indiana, with both games kind of turning into grinded out affairs. So I think Texas Tech might have the edge here a little bit.
And like I mentioned at the top here, it's Oregon -1.5. Sort of a high-ish total when you just glance at it, 52.5 with these two teams. But what's your bet here?
Yeah, I'm kind of going to contradict myself here, but all that said, I do think Dante Moore is the difference maker here. I'm going to go Oregon -1.5. I just think Dante Moore is really capable of explosive plays. He's completed over 72% of his passes. I think he can create big gains when they need him to, even when the defense fails him. He's kind of showed us that all year. I also think Oregon's just been battle tested against ranked opponents, competitive games against Indiana and Iowa and Penn State, when Penn State was good, and USC. So I think the Ducks know how to adjust when defenses like Texas Tech try to shut them down. Again, I think Texas Tech's defense is phenomenal, and I think they're going to make it a grind, but their offense hasn't faced a quarterback with Moore's accuracy or an offense as deep as Oregon. So I think Oregon's ability to mix in the pass and the run gives them the edge in this game.
Let us know your favorite bet for the CFP quarterfinals in the comments below. Maybe it's Ohio State. Maybe it's Oregon. Maybe it's the number 1 team in the country, Indiana. They get paired with Alabama, who posted a 10-point win over Oklahoma. Oklahoma in that game was in the driver's seat, but Alabama did show a lot of character as they came back to win that round 1 game, coming back from 17-zip. Did that prove to you that maybe Alabama can go ahead and not only win this football game, maybe go on and win the championship, a character-building win, as they say, Josie?
I'm a tough crowd, personally. I think Alabama definitely showed resilience, no question, scoring 27 straight points and not folding under pressure. But for me, that leaned heavily on opportunistic plays, the pick six, a blocked punt. For me, the biggest thing is the Tide managed 28 rushing yards on 25 carries in that game. That's concerning. That's not going to fly.
Many folks, myself certainly included, have sort of been sleeping on this Indiana team. But Curt Cignetti has this team playing really good, really clean football, basically in all phases. They don't make the mistakes that we see other programs do. And this matchup is probably going to come down to Alabama's offense against Indiana's defense. So who do you give the edge to, thinking through that lens?
Yeah, like you just said, this is an Indiana team that like doesn't really make mistakes. And as I just spoke about before, like Alabama really took, the mistakes that they were given in round one and played it to their advantage. But I don't think they're going to get those opportunities here. I think Indiana's defense has been really good, again, allowing almost, under double-digit points and ranking top 5 in third down defense, too. They control the clock, forces people into long drives, which isn't something you really want if you're the Tide, since Ty Simpson did throw 4 interceptions in his last 4 regular season games. Alabama also went 2 for 12 on third downs in that first round game. Again, 28 rushing yards on 25 carries. I'm just thinking that this one-dimensional approach is not going to work here.
Well, Indiana's a 7-point fave. The total is 48.5. Hoosiers minus 245 on the money line. Tide come back at 2-1. What's your bet for this one?
Yeah, so this one's a tough one, but the Hoosiers, okay, they rank top 10 in time of possession, top 25 in sacks, really, again, allowing them to really control the pace here, pressure Alabama into mistakes, which we know that they can make. The offense, complements this nearly, 250 rushing yards a game. And for, Mendoza's coming off his Heisman win. He's back on the field. So you think that he's playing with a bit of a, excitement following him. I think Indiana's 4-0 against the spread when they're favored by, 6.5 points. I think they're really reliable at this number, so I'm going to take them to cover.
Folks, don't go through a busy holiday sports betting schedule without Prop Professor, because you can get it for 50% off for the first month right now. Get hundreds of plus EV bets every day. Prop Professor gives you a real shot at finding long-term profit. You can sort through plays across college football, across the NFL, across the NBA, and much more. There is a great arbitrage tool. There's a great fantasy optimizer as well. It's easily the best bang for buck on the market compared to its competition. You can go ahead, use the promo code SHARK50 at checkout to get 50% off for the first month. The last game, Josie, features Georgia against Ole Miss. The Dogs 6.5-point faves at the Sugar Bowl. Total is 55.5. Obviously some familiarity here between these two. They combined for 78 points earlier on in the season, but that Ole Miss defense couldn't get a stop to save its life, like at all. Have you seen anything from this defensive unit at Ole Miss since then that points to maybe some signs of improvement? That first meeting was all the way back in October.
Yeah, this is probably the game I'm most excited for. And I love a good rematch. But absolutely, I think since that Week 8 game, both defenses, I think, have really tightened up. But for me, the most noticeable jump has been from Georgia. The Bulldogs have allowed just, 11 points over their last stretch, holding every opponent since that game under 21 points, which shows that they've kind of locked down. Ole Miss, though, has improved, like you said, giving up, 13 points per game in their last 4, including Tulane, a top 25 offense averaging over 400 yards per game to just 10 points. So, that's something that you definitely want going into this matchup. Yeah.
And both those quarterbacks put up some very good numbers in that first meeting way back when. But do you think maybe there's an element of a letdown spot for Ole Miss because they won that first round game without Lane Kiffin, and because it gave them a chance to exhale a little bit with a big CFP win? Or do you think that it could just add to their motivation to keep going, try to put up a bunch of points again on Georgia like they did in that first meeting?
Yeah, I think even if they do enter motivated, there's still a lot working against them. In Week 8, I think they relied a lot on, tempo and chunk plays for those 43 points. And again, I think Georgia's defensive adjustments will limit them this time around. I think we're going to see a completely different game. Ole Miss is also facing uncertainty, with injuries right now. I haven't checked this morning, but, Lacey and even Chambliss. So, that could force less experienced players into high pressure situations. So even if they were motivated, the kind of, let some air out of the balloon. I think it's harder to replicate the kind of scoring explosion that they had before with these injuries and, Georgia's defensive adjustments, even with any motivation that they had. So
the Dogs are 6.5-point faves. This one at the Sugar Bowl, total 55.5. What's your bet here?
I'm going Bulldogs minus 6.5. They held Tulane to 10 points. They did give up over 420 yards, but so Ole Miss, they can't allow chunks of yards like that to the Dogs. They really can. Like 420 yards is insane. I think, Ole Miss still owns one of the most explosive offenses, but, now they could be without those two key pieces to that offense if Lacey doesn't play. And last I checked, he was questionable. I don't know what's happening with Chambliss. That was weird. So yeah, the defensive cracks definitely showed against Georgia before, and I think they're going to show even more now. In their last meeting too, the Bulldogs won despite trailing twice. They closed the game with 17 unanswered points and dominated possession by 15 minutes. So the Dogs were kind of all over him, even though Ole Miss was putting up the points to try to compete. The Rebels were also one of 3 teams to let Georgia pocket 500 plus yards this season, and Ole Miss cracked 400 yards in every meeting this season but one, which was against Georgia. So I think, the Rebels were held to a season low 351 yards in week 8. So I'm not sure they really have the solution to figure out how they can work around the Bulldogs again this time around. So give me Georgia.